Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast. Today's episode takes a look at individuals who have chosen an unorthodox way to earn income. They've gone as far as murder and have paid the consequences. We dive into what drives people to commit crimes for financial gain. And I share my personal, untold story of being robbed at gunpoint while working as a bank teller in Washington State. Ron, I know you have quite a few personal accounts that you'll be sharing of your own.
Oh my gosh, I have so many through my years of law enforcement.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I thought you said you robbed a bank, so I'm glad you were
My
robbed.
Personal story.
Okay, I got it.
I could see it coming across that way.
So, Kristin, our listeners, viewers may be wondering why we're delving into this, but I think it's very important to understand greed and illegal conduct because it happens every day across America in various companies. And as we research this, there's story after story of companies who commit fraud, break laws, and so forth. So we're kind of tying this in because it usually starts with a leader. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it reminded me of the 7 deadly sins. And one is vainglory or pride, greed or covetousness, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. Yeah. And I think if you look at those 7 deadly sins, a lot of the crimes, even the ones that lead up to murder, has some of those characteristics. As a matter of fact, I've been watching Fatal Attraction on Paramount Plus, and it's such an interesting story. It's not the old movie. I'm sure it's a spinoff of that, but
right.
It does go into a prosecutor who steps out on his wife, and the person becomes obsessed with him, and the events that unfold are pretty scary, actually.
I'm gonna have to check that out. It sounds like something right up my alley. And not only is this a good subject to cover because as leaders, it's important to understand how many different personality types are out there. I'm not saying you have murderers working for you or you're working for one, but it's interesting to be able to understand what drives people to these extremes. And so I'm going to start with a story that's coming out of Utah, and it's very recent. Last week, a Utah woman was arrested for her husband's murder, but not before capitalizing from his death by writing a children's book on grief, and this is quote unquote, to help her 3 sons process their father's sudden death. Little did everyone know she intentionally poisoned her husband with a lethal dose of fentanyl. So the audacity to go and write a book on grief for her 3 sons and then actually dedicate the book to her 3 sons and her late husband when she was the one who murdered him in the first place. Wow, some people have some gall. It's amazing how far people are willing to go to cash in. Wow, right? Where's your head at with this, Ron?
No, we see it so much. Of course, there's nothing surprises me. And with the True Crime series, it's the most popular podcast nearly in America. People listen to those all the time. My daughters listen to them. But we have said, I want to make sure people understand, this is the dirty side of leadership. And so it's not all hunky-dory. And
right.
So we're going to be looking at various behaviors in leadership, and some that, of course, lead to illicit behavior. Some of it is bullying, like we've talked about. Some of it is narcissistic behaviors. So this is just another area where we're delving in. And Kristin, I think we've talked about psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists. I think outside of that, maybe some of these things start small. You know, I mentioned Fatal Attraction. The cover-up and the desperation to cover it up is where the most significant crimes begin to happen. So what happens is I think these things have a snowball effect. And I mentioned earlier, there's usually a leader. Now, in my career, I noticed, you always have people who commit crimes out of desperation.
Right.
You have addicts. I've seen, it's terrible, but I've seen meth users or people addicted to crack who will just do anything to get another hit. So, we won't go into that on this particular podcast, but if you think about it, there's usually, outside of those 7 deadly sins, you have a leader who usually promises to share the fruits of the crime, or you have a leader who is overbearing and pressuring and demanding that people do certain things.
Right.
And through that intimidation, people have committed all kinds of crimes. And then there's some people who are just thrill seekers. They really are. I remember I used to teach GED in the jail. And one of my proud accomplishments, and by the way, I would go in the pod with them. There was only like 5. They gave us a separate pod. And I would even eat dinner with them while we're teaching.
Oh, wow.
I was single. The people in the cafeteria liked me. I said, hey, bring me a plate, please. So we would sit there and eat. And anyway, 4 out of the 5 passed. And this one young man, he only failed by like a couple of points. But he was getting released. So when I talked to him, he was really upset that he thought he let me down. I said, no, you only missed about a couple points. You're going to get it. And I referred him to an adult learning class when he got released. So I talked to him on like a Wednesday. Well, when I came in on Monday as a state probation officer, you would check the jail list back in the day. Well, I checked the list and there's his name. And he did a crime called joyriding. They would steal a car just to, do high speeds and all that, but then they would leave it, just joyriding. So anyway, I'm looking at the jail list. There's his name. And I said, hey, I thought he got released on Friday. They said, he did, but he stole a car on Saturday.
My goodness.
He was back in my Sunday
He just
evening.
really wanted to finish that GED run.
It was me.
That was for you.
I inspired him so
100%.
much. 100%. I just wish you could have seen his face. I walked up to the cell, and he's just leaned against the wall block, and he goes, hello, Mr. Ward.
Oh, my gosh. He knew. He knew he was going to get an earful.
Oh, my gosh.
Some people, we've all seen Shawshank Redemption. It's, especially if you've been in a long time, it's what you know. And it's very scary to be out on the streets.
It really is. And Kristin, I know you're going to tell us another good story, but in courts, a lot of people hear the term restitution and fines. They don't know how it works. But one of the things that I did as a probation officer is you try to help the court determine restitution, who it should be paid to, the amount, and that can get a little complex. One time I worked a case where 50 horses were burned to death, and to come up with that restitution list was a nightmare. The whole story was a nightmare. But what happened is, in the United States, people began to profit from their crimes even after they go to prison. If you watch some of these interviews and things, people get paid for that. So in the 70s, about 77, they passed the Son of Sam laws. So David Berkowitz, who, used the call name Son of Sam, when he got arrested in New York, his notoriety was such that people were convinced that he was going to write a book, and the rumor spread. He denied it, but they passed the Son of Sam law, preventing people from profiting from being in prison or committing crimes. And I think literally like 40-some states passed the laws. The federal government passed the law. But it's interesting because the Supreme Court in some cases ruled that it undermined First Amendment rights. So it's not been clear, but I think the intent was good so that people couldn't do something horrendous and then get rich while they're in prison.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is a tough one because I'm a stickler for the Constitution. But you're right, 42 out of 50 states passed that. But there have been multiple lawsuits on people saying that's unconstitutional. I should be able to make money and have that money go to my family. But then I also see that you shouldn't benefit from a crime that you've committed. So that's interesting. I wanted to touch on the gal that killed her husband. And just so everyone knows, her first attempt, it was a failed attempt, was on Valentine's Day. How sweet. But a few days later, she was successful, unfortunately. But Amazon pulled her book the day she was arrested. So I actually appreciated seeing that because, of course, I went to go check the book out, not literally like check it out like the library, but I wanted to go see what it was all about, what her sales were, what her ratings were, etc. It was gone. So she's not making any more money, at least on the Amazon angle. It was a grief book. And it was all about grieving her late husband, and it was from her kid's point of view. Ironically, on the cover, it had like one of the boys playing soccer, and then up in the background, it shows the husband as if he's an angel. He has wings and a halo. and his hands are like up, like he's greeting his son. And just really, how disgusting for someone to actually kill their husband and then write a book about it as they're watching their sons grieve a very avoidable death of their father. So, wow. I mean, that type of personality, and actually a body language, someone that can read body language very well. I can't remember the technical terminology, but he was watching an interview that she did. A local Utah news station did an interview with her. This is before her arrest, and she was promoting her book. And it was a body language expert. And they said that the way she was acting portrayed that she was available and open to a new love interest. So I thought that was curious also.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. That happens a lot. I remember when I would visit jails, there was one jail that I visited, you had to lock your weapon in the lobby, which was very uncomfortable because everyone's looking at you, but it was so interesting. It would be almost all females. This was a male holding facility, and it would be girlfriends and mothers who would be in the lobby on visitation day. It was always interesting to see that.
Yeah.
So, Kristin, I have a weird, gosh, this story is so weird.
You know I love anything bizarre.
Well, this one's bizarre.
Bring it on.
So, there was this individual, and he began to commit insurance fraud over a period of years. He would purchase a house, the house would burn, and he was pretty skilled because it was hard for the fire marshal to really pinpoint. They suspected he burnt the house, but it was difficult for them to prove it. So he would draw insurance money. There was a couple of automobile accidents where he drew insurance money. So finally, he did enough until he got charged with insurance fraud. Mm. And in the course of this investigation, not to get too complex, but if you write a federal pre-sentence report, you can look at relevant conduct, other things. And then there's also cross-references. So through the period of me doing this investigation, and I verified this through a couple of people, we were not able to cross-reference murder, but this was so creepy. So there were 5 individuals, 3 died, and these were actually labeled and investigated and labeled as accidents. Ugh. But it turns out 5 people, he was the beneficiary of 5 insurance policies on these 5 people. One was a mentally handicapped stepson that he took hunting, and the kid accidentally shot himself.
Oh, how convenient.
On this hunting accident. Another was a wife who fell down the steps. Ugh. And she died. And I'm drawing a blank on the third death, which might have actually been cancer or something. But he's the beneficiary. Well, it turns out I don't think he really understood insurance to the point, because I've read up on this. Some insurance companies will not pay on suicide.
Right.
But he came up with this game that they would play, and he would say, hey, everyone, I want you to write your suicide note and sign it, and then we're going to vote on who wrote the best suicide note.
Oh, my goodness.
And he played it up. He said, if someone hurt you, or if you want to send, that you love someone, like, make it really good, and we're going to vote. And he gave like $100 prize.
Wow.
And these were low-income type people, so $100 to write a good suicide note.
So sorry.
So anyway, he literally wrote those, and I had a witness say that he kept those in a briefcase, as an insurance policy. But the fact that the deaths were ruled accidental, the young man that shot himself and then the ex-wife that fell down the steps, he didn't have to invoke those suicide notes. But we told you we would be informational, so don't ever write a suicide note if you
Someone's like, hey, let's like Friday night, like, why don't we just write some suicide notes?
We are not recommending this game.
Let's see. That is insane. It is. That's literally,
so bizarre.
That's bizarro land for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't even, I'm sure you have a million of those. I told everyone earlier, I will share my untold robbery story. When I say untold, I haven't told it publicly. It's just been once in a while I pull it out. But I break it down. I want to break it down for everyone because it's really interesting on how it played out, and it highlights the FBI in a sense. And Ron, I want your feedback on that. But I want to break down the location for you guys. So this is 2003. This is Vancouver, Washington. It's a suburb of Portland, Oregon. And the bank I worked at was a small branch located inside a grocery store. They're called in-stores. And this one was back towards the left, past the floral section next to the public restrooms. So really not a smart design because it was so far away from the front doors and really not very visible to many. So one day, my coworker and I, it was relatively slow as far as foot traffic is concerned, and we were shooting the breeze about some college courses that we were taking at the local community college, and a guy pops out of the bathroom area with a ski mask on, a black ski mask, and he was pointing a gun at us. And he was robbing us. But it was wild how your mind doesn't let you go there immediately for me, because I've always been a big prankster, especially at that time in my life. I thought it was a joke in the very beginning. So it took me a few seconds to stop because I was literally like smiling, kind of like smirking, like what's happening here? Then I realized it was real when you have the gun in your face. And he instructed me to have the bag open and for my friend to unload our drawers and put everything into the bag. So we were doing this, and I just remember, my friends like to give me a tough time about this one because it is kind of funny, but I remember asking him if he wanted my nickel rolls, because in my mind he said, I want everything out of your drawers. And so where I was thinking, oh my gosh, like if I don't offer him all of these coin rolls that I have, he could say, you didn't give me everything, and shoot me, right? So I was like, would you like my nickel rolls? And he was like, no. But that was when I looked right at him and made eye contact. Oh my gosh, I know.
Would you like my nickel rolls?
Would you like my nickel rolls, with the gun in my face? But I was like, you see like the mindset. I'm like, okay, some psychos out there can be like, you didn't give me everything, right? So he didn't want the nickel rolls, it turns out. Shocker, yeah. So the funny part is, though, when you work in an in-store, and this is how it was at this time, but you keep a low drawer limit. And so this guy didn't even get $4,000 between the two of us. So very low walkout. But the scariest part of this whole exchange was my boss worked in the back room. And the wall behind us that had the back room was like a mural. So the door was almost a hidden door. So he goes to leave to go to lunch. And so all of this sudden, this door appears and there's a bank manager walking out of it. And this is in the middle of the robbery. And so he gets startled and he ends up pointing the gun at my boss and said, don't move. And I want to see both hands. So if someone were to have been shot, it would have been my boss right then because he startled him. But luckily, he got his money, he left, and that was that. And I waited until I no longer could see him before I turned my back to him to go into the back room. But when I did, and you can analyze me on this one, when I went to the back room and my coworker, she starts crying hysterically, and I start laughing, and I was like, whoa, that was crazy. Like, I don't know. I just remember like my adrenaline rush was to laugh. Hers was pretty typical. I would say most people are going to cry, or at least you would think. Why do some people respond with laughter when they're nervous?
You know, Kristin, I was actually thinking we should be vulnerable, but maybe you went a little overboard there with that laugh.
So you're saying I'm a psycho?
No.
Oh my goodness.
No, I listen, without getting too complex, because I'd love to do an episode on this, but the physiological factors of fear. Everybody's heard of fight or flight.
Right.
And when we are going through our autonomic nervous system, you have the parasympathetic nervous system that's in control. And then when you are faced in that situation, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. And you know, that's how people are able to, you've heard of people lifting cars and doing all this stuff because, they get maximum strength. The blood flow is rushing. The heart's pounding. Endorphins are released. There's all these things that are going on chemically. But what happens is right after that, the parasympathetic starts to take back over, and there's a little war going on in your nervous system, and that's when you start to feel weak. But you also have just weird reactions, and there's a lot of people, when they get nervous, they laugh. And I guess, how long did you laugh, Kristin? I mean,
no, I'm talking like 10 seconds. That was like my immediate response. But I will say, so what they do right after you're robbed is you have to go and write up a statement, and you're separated from anyone else who is writing up a statement so that you don't have that group thinking like, hey, that was the red sweatshirt, right? Mm-hmm. So they separate us. We all write our statements out, victim statement, whatever you call it. And so we write that out. And shortly after, the FBI shows up and they tape off the branch counter. So again, this is an in-store. And so it's very difficult to control the scene, the crime scene, because you have customers. We literally had a-holes that were trying to climb over the FBI tape to make a deposit, and they were contaminating the crime scene. So, I mean, it's just, people are just crazy. But so from there, we write up our statements. Then they say, we have somebody, what do they call, what's the technical terminology? We have somebody detained that matches your description, and we want to, this is where they drive by it. It's called a show up. They wanted to do a show up. So I had to get in the back of the car with 2 FBI agents. And I remember feeling uncomfortable about driving right by the bank robber. Like, oh, he's going to see the person who identified him. I remember saying, is he going to be able to see me? And they're like, no, we have to maintain a safe distance, right? Like, that's written into how they're supposed to perform, even at a local police level. So I felt, okay, safe distance, right? No, I could have, when they drove me past this guy, if the window was rolled down, I could have reached out and touched his face. That's how close I was to him. So I was low-key pissed about that. But there is a humorous aspect to this. But first, the part that's not so funny is the fact that I had clearly said this person was wearing like a navy blue zip-up hoodie, and he had ice blue eyes. And I remembered that because when I asked about the nickel rolls, I looked him right in the eye, and they were ice blue. So this guy that they had on the side of the road detained, he had brown eyes, and he was wearing a red zip-up hoodie. And the FBI, they were trying to shove down my throat that was the guy. And I was like, no, you can change a sweatshirt, but you can't just pop out your eyeballs and pop in some new ones, right? I guess you could do contacts if you wanted to get crazy, but no, that's not him. Doesn't look like him. And wow, it was really being suggested that I was incorrect on that. Luckily, my coworker, they drove her by as well, and she had the same reaction, like, no, this is not the right person. So as I had said no and dismissed him as the suspect, and they go to drive away, and then someone from the FBI who's on the side of the road flags them down, and they stop, and they kind of whisper something to the driver. And he looks up at me in the rearview mirror, and he says, do you know that guy? And I said, I don't think so. And he said, well, he said you dated his brother. And I go, I don't know, I might have.
Wait, hey, I'm getting confused. Did you date the bank robber or the guy they thought was the bank robber? Like, who'd you date, Kristin?
The guy they thought was the bank robber's brother. And I don't know. I can't confirm it, but I can't not confirm it. They didn't give me a name. Who knows? It was single mingle time. But I thought that was funny. So, for a split second, they thought I was in on it because that happens all the time. Bank tellers will work with someone to orchestrate a bank robbery or something behind the scenes where they're robbing a customer through deposits and withdrawals. And so, but for a split second, they thought that I was a bad gal. But I thought that was quite funny. I have to say, though, even though I laughed right after the robbery, that was my initial reaction, and I don't really get rocked by too much. But I did go home and I turned on every light in the house. I remember that. And I did that for a few days. I didn't miss any work because they do offer, they're like, if you need to stay away from the bank for a little while, we understand. I didn't need any days off, but I did turn the lights on for a couple days after. And the only other thing I had happen was I had a nightmare that some old guy that he was dragging a leg behind, and he had a shotgun pointed at me in the branch. And other than that, I was pretty good.
Yeah, through the course of my career, we had some pretty intense bank robberies, and I did have one that was really sad. I'm not going to go into details with that one now, but it did involve a female with a gun literally stuck against the back of her head, going back to the vault, and she was never able to return. She had to go through. She was still in counseling, as long as I can remember. So that was very graphic and very sad that happened. So, Kristin, let's bring this down to the day-to-day work. A lot of the things we discuss as leadership at work, and I'll do a little plug. We provide executive coaching, and would love to hear from anyone who's interested in executive coaching. But I was coaching someone, and what had happened is this person was managing a grant. And the person that was the administrator, the person that was basically over it, there's a board, but you have it's kind of the same as a CEO, but it's a nonprofit, a 501c3. Right. He was misusing funds, and she was aware of it, but she didn't know what to do. And many times what people don't understand in conspiracies, you can get charged if you've got knowledge of the crime. Right. You can be a co-conspirator. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So she had also been pressured. She was smart enough not to actually commit any overt offenses. But in this situation, ordinarily, if I'm providing executive coaching, someone's having a hard time at work, most of the time I coach them through it. Right. I tell them, get your circle of support. If you have to get counseling, take breaks, think on positive things, do things you love. We walk through ways to stay healthy during that time. But in this situation, I quickly said, get your resume. I'm going to review it for you. We're going to make it walk and talk. I started preparing interview skills, and I said, you got to leave. You got to leave now. And also, you need to report to the head of the board what you believe. Now, by the way, I just want to be very clear. She was speculating. It appeared things did not look legal. She had no actual knowledge, but it didn't look good. Right. And she explained it to me. It didn't look good. So I basically coached her out of there and to get a better career. And that's kind of rare when you're coaching, but the minute I see illegal conduct happening or fraudulent conduct, that's when, you have no choice as a coach, as an executive coach, you want to coach someone out of that place. But
absolutely. I mean, there's toxic workplaces, just like toxic relationships. And I know, Ron, that I'm in the process of writing a book on how to maintain relationships, because so many people are often let down by friendships, especially, and they think that their one friend is going to check every single friend box that they have for them. And that's generally not going to be the case. But there are the cases of the toxic person that you just need to cut out like cancer. Don't let it sit there and grow. You need to get rid of it. And I think that is the same in the workplace.
I read a cool meme the other day that just basically said that as you rise in the heights, you will have to leave some friendships behind. And it's very true. And we're very excited about Kristin's journey, but we'll talk about that at another time.
Yes.
So we're always solution-minded. And Kristin, I wanted to bring something down that's a little more relevant to what we've been talking about. This
you know what, though, Ron?
Go ahead.
I never talk about Wells. I never told people what happened to the bank robber.
Oh, my gosh. Yes,
I forgot
please.
that last. You guys are just
Please.
going to be like, what happened?
After you broke up with him, what happened?
Oh, my gosh. He's doing great.
Was it Valentine's Day? I'm joking. All right.
Years later, I received a subpoena that basically said they had arrested him and they were going to be charging him. I don't know all the legal jargon, but I was invited to go to this event and read a victim impact statement.
Yes.
I did not need to do that I was able to move past it pretty quickly. But I thought that was really interesting. And I believe he was sentenced for something upwards of 14 years. So people forget that bank robbery, you get the book thrown at you because it's federal. And so it's not like just going and robbing a ma and pa little convenience store. And I don't condone that either. But you're going to get less time when it's something like that versus a bank.
Oh, wow. I'm glad you finished. I was wanting to hear your impact statement, but I understand. Not that it would have made that much difference, but I
ain't got no time for that.
I've heard some very impactful, no pun intended, statements in hearings, and they are important.
Right.
Again, I won't go into it, but I worked some bank robberies, but I thought one was very unique. These individuals had robbed 5 banks, and they were all independently wealthy by the 5th bank. So
oh my goodness.
I couldn't help but ask. I'm asking this one individual, I said, didn't you have quite a bit of money hidden away? Like, why'd you do it? And he literally said, Mr. Ward, it was the thrill. We missed the thrill. And that's why they robbed bank number 6.
Wow.
They wanted that thrill. It's always
I think
thrill
we've all
seekers.
seen Point Break, right? I mean, that one, they were trying to fund their endless surfing journey, right?
Yeah.
But I also think that they were thrill seekers. Such a good movie.
Yeah.
But I think it has some truth to it.
So one more little story that will make this, we want to bring this to the day-to-day operations. Again, I told you about someone I coached. Every day people are pressured for various reasons to, commit fraud, commit crimes.
Right.
And so Wells Fargo, and you can research this, it's all over the internet, and I'm just going to summarize because some of the executives receive time, but it was in February 2020, they had to pay $3 billion to settle a federal civil and criminal probes. And they admitted that between 2002 and 2016, they put so much pressure on their employees that they opened fake accounts for customers. Now, keep in mind, when it comes to stock market, the board, they're counting all of these accounts, which really was just something on a piece of paper. It's a little bit of the Bernie Madoff type stuff. They didn't exist. So you're cooking the books, as they say, to make yourself look more profitable. But these employees were under all that pressure, and that's what they started doing. Fortunately, and I'm not condoning that, but there were very few individuals charged who were further down the ladder. They did go after the executives, which finally, that's good to see. I do think it's unique as a side note that, usually executives on huge white-collar crimes get a maximum of like 16 months, 24 months.
Right.
And, you see people with half an ounce of crack cocaine or meth, and they're getting 10 years. There's a little bit of disparity there, but that's another episode for another time. My point is that if you are listening, you have to understand that you are still responsible for your actions. Now, these employees got off, I think, pretty easily, but pretty well considering the circumstances. But if you do feel that you are being pressured to commit fraudulent acts, you need an exit strategy and you need to report it to a superior. Sometimes that could be law enforcement. But every day, I know there's little things in marketing and sales. People exaggerate all the time. And Kristin, once I wrote a book and started studying marketing, I didn't know how prevalent that it was. Right. But it all started, think back, order now while supplies last. Or you'll see the countdown and you're sitting there going, oh my God, if I don't hurry and dial this number, they're going to run out.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Those are small things. And I'm not really talking about that. But I was surprised at all the marketing schemes that go on. But if you are being pressured, you need to exit. You need to report. You need to avoid. And these things start small. And I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, but I had a bank teller, ironically, Kristin, since that's your world, but she befriended an elderly lady and she had her bank number. She had full access. So she just started skimming a little bit at a time. She said she was doing it to pay her bills. But when it was all said and done and I interviewed her, she said she skimmed 60,000, a maximum of 60, and it was more like 120, 130,000. So what happens is you start small with these things. Even there's people start with shoplifting, and then it just grows. These things grow. And, you know, if someone is a parent and their child starts doing these things, you got to deal with that early.
Right.
Because it can grow and evolve into more serious behavior. But we wanted to cover this because, number one, it's so interesting, and we said from the very beginning where leadership meets entertainment, and we do plan to provide you with some entertaining stories. We don't apologize for that because these are all enjoyable. But again, we try to have some solutions, something to at least spark a thought. And there could be someone listening who's being pressured to do some unethical things as we speak, Kristin. You never know.
Oh, absolutely. I know. And you mentioned that when it came to, were you working at Home Depot or Best Buy or I don't know?
That was Lowe's.
Lowe's. Right. Okay. So yeah, and so even something as benign as you're going to enter my sales code for any sale you make, right? Or me, I remember at one point I had a manager call me and say, "What's your password? You made a mistake on a transaction. I need to go in and fix it for you." And I was like, how about I just come in? I live close enough, right? So just things like that. If it feels wrong, don't do it.
That's exactly right. And Kristin, I promise you, spent a whole career in law enforcement until you just said that when this person at Lowe's wanted me to enter his number. I didn't even think about it as fraud. I just thought about him scaring me, standing over there staring at me like he was going to beat the crap out of me. He was 31 years old. I was 18 or 19. And but yeah, that's actually fraudulent. And so he was trying to get me to commit fraud.
Yeah, exactly. He was cooking the books.
He was wanting to cook the books, that's for sure.
Exactly.
It did make me wonder who else maybe he had tried to intimidate.
You know, you
or
weren't
what
his
else
first victim. Well, you weren't a victim. You stood up. But, you know, you weren't his first person that he approached. You know, he probably had a pyramid scheme going.
I thought I was
like
special.
five people under him. Yeah, it was just you. No one wants to be the only one, right?
I was his only one. Oh, wow.
Oh, goodness.
Guys, Kristin, this is so much fun. We are cooking along. We got some great episodes planned. I can assure you, Kristin and I are always reading, studying, planning, prepping.
Oh, yeah.
And we do, I said a couple weeks ago, we are going to have some giveaways and a couple, we've got a joint project we're going to announce soon. Yes. But I wanted to take a minute, and we talked about this before. We're genuine and sincere. It's so nice to get the feedback that we're getting, people who are engaging, people who are growing. And if you've got a topic you would like for us to cover, chances are we'll probably do it if we possibly can. And but we are just very grateful when we look at all the different downloads and likes. We're on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Rumble, and other places that I didn't even know, Kristin, until we looked at Buzzsprout, which is what we use. I want to thank our producer, Stephen, who does a great job for us. And it's just really cool. I'm just loving this experience. I was just before we went on, Kristin, my daughter called from work, and in the background she said, "Will you be recording your podcast when I walk in?" And it's a dental office, and it's an all-female dental office. So I heard the females in the background. They said, "Your dad does a podcast?" And
That's awesome.
And then my daughter goes, "Yeah, and he wrote a book." They're like, "Really? That's so cool." And I was like, "Great job, Jansen. You haven't even mentioned me." So then she goes,
"That's funny.
That's a leadership podcast." I said, "Jansen, it's where leadership meets entertainment. You got to get the slogan going." And she just started laughing. She goes, "It's where leadership meets entertainment." So not my best marketer. I can hear that playing out. Not my best marketer, but hey.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. You never know. They'll be like, "We want to see who her dad is. Let's check it out." It's really interesting. That's exactly not everyone's dad has a podcast or has written a book, a best-selling book. I'm going to plug you.
Oh, kids these days.
I know.
Final thoughts, Kristin?
This is great. No, I just think it's important. I think it's awesome that we were both willing to go off the beaten path a little bit with the topic of this episode, because if you think about leadership, there's so much that branches off of it and so many complexities. And so to be able to touch on those even like this, the killer business plan, right? It's really cool to be able to reach out and then pull it back into leadership and apply it in our everyday lives. So I am pumped about this one as well.
All right. We sure hope you'll follow us on this journey. And one of the best things you can do, and we've got some people doing this, is you tell a friend, tell someone, hey, there's a cool podcast. You need to check it out.
Yes, and rate it, please. I've seen a few more coming in this last week, a few more ratings. So we appreciate the subscription, and we really need those ratings.
Absolutely. All right. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.